The story kicks off with our protagonist looking completely wiped out while someone asks what he's doing and tells him to hurry up and steal the curse affecting Lord Arthur. Even at his limit, our guy says he'll steal the curse right now, and then he starts using his magic. This poor guy's name is Krosh Walheim, and he reveals that he's a failure born into the strongest family line there is. He then finally finishes casting his skill and unleashes his technique, Black Hood, to break the curse on Arthur. And just like that, the curse shatters. This is a technique specifically designed to steal curses from other people. In doing so, Krosh absorbs all the negative energy into himself, and then he's revealed to be a hero of the Blue Sky generation. After Arthur is freed from the curse, his allies rush to give him a potion while Krosh is just left wiped out on the ground. Arthur then looks up at the sky and spots a skeletal knight flying above. The skull glares down at the group, getting ready for a fight, and without wasting a second, the monster hurls a fireball and obliterates the mountain. Arthur then wonders if they're really going to fight the Blue Knight of Demise with so few people, and then he throws his sword to the ground and says it's impossible to win. Seeing the situation, he calls for his companions Sigrun, Abella, and Mary to come with him. Right after, the girls hug Lord Arthur, who seems to have given up on everything. Our protagonist is totally confused and asks Arthur what the heck he's doing, and he just replies that he's going to end it all right now. Krosh thinks that the world's last hope has just been snuffed out and now only ruin remains. He's furious at the idea of his companions simply giving up on the fight, and wonders if the hero has any idea how many sacrifices were made for him to get this far. Krosh then says that many people met their end while Arthur was just off chasing skirts. At that moment, one of the girls tells Krosh to shut up. This is Sigrun of Fania, the third princess of the Empire, and she defends Arthur, saying he did his best. She even calls our protagonist a piece of trash who can't do anything but steal and tells him not to dare lecture Arthur. Our protagonist is shocked by the girl's audacity and gets ticked off for being called trash. And as he holds out his hand, he asks how they dare say that to the person who saved their lives so many times, and yells that if it weren't for his ability, they never would have made it this far. So, he offers to refresh everyone's memory, starting with Abella. This girl is Abella from the Magic Tower, also known as the Red Witch of the Blue Sky generation. Krosh reminds her that she wouldn't be able to use magic if she couldn't speak, yet she demanded he steal her curses countless times. He even recalls that while he was suffering from her curse, the girl attacked him when he was just trying to get some painkillers, and back then, just like now, her attitude of looking down on everyone and thinking she's better than them hasn't changed a bit. From there, he shifts his focus to the Empire's strongest spear, Mary Diana Fania. Our protagonist describes her as a brainless idiot who would fall for any curse and then cry and beg him to steal them. Next, he talks about the princess who called her savior trash even after he sacrificed his own eyes for her, and he turns to Sigrun asking if she has any idea how he felt helping her. Krosh remembers how she used to pick on him at the academy just because he was from the Starland Kingdom faction, and because of that, he got beat up a lot, while others called him a failure who couldn't even fight back. People even doubted if he was a real Walheim, but Krosh endured it all and healed her eyes. He then reveals that he put up with all of it because Sigrun was a member of the Blue Sky generation, the only hope that could save the world, and while she was a hero, he saw himself as just a disgrace to the kingdom, a failure with no talent for fighting whatsoever. Because of this, our protagonist questions what the point was of cleaning up all their messes for so long, and says that with someone else, maybe it wouldn't have worked, but with Arthur there, they should have been able to save the world. Our protagonist then remembers when he first met Arthur and admired him, even knowing he was leading those fools. Krosh saw him on the front lines of the Blue Sky generation, and in that moment, he decided he'd stick by his side forever. Back in the present, the young man asks why Arthur is giving up so easily, and the hero replies that now, he can finally tell the truth, and says that it's okay for him to talk now, and reveals that since the world is already over, he's going to start everything over from the beginning. Our protagonist is completely floored by the idea of starting everything from scratch. Arthur then confirms it and reveals that this isn't the first time he's experienced the world's destruction, and the reason is that his special ability is called Regression, which leaves Krosh totally jaw-dropped. The hero continues, explaining that he acquired a memory inheritance technique, so the three girls can also regress while keeping their memories. Our protagonist starts to process the information and realizes that if everyone could start over with the experience they've gained, the probability of preventing the destruction in the next life would increase dramatically, and that was exactly Arthur's plan. Arthur then declares that he's going to start everything over from the beginning with just the three girls. Our protagonist is in shock and asks what's going to happen to him. Hearing this, Arthur cracks a smile and says the Krosh is no longer needed. In that instant, our protagonist can't believe what he just heard. Arthur explains that our protagonist's Black Hood ability was useful useful, since it allowed them to steal powerful curses that were impossible to break otherwise, but he questions what the point would be of regressing with Krosh, since his body and mind are completely broken down. Therefore, Arthur says it's more efficient to just get a new, clean version of him in the next life. Our protagonist finally understands that he was used as a disposable item the entire time. He realizes that Arthur planned to discard him from the very beginning, and the hero even tells him not to worry, because he'll use him in the next life, and the one after that, and then coldly says goodbye, telling him they'll meet again. The young man tries to tell him to wait as Arthur, and the girls begin to fade away. As he reaches out, our protagonist thinks that he'd actually known it all along. He reflects that if Arthur had truly considered him a real companion, he wouldn't have just stood by while the others ignored and mistreated him. Desperate, our protagonist screams for Arthur to take him with him. Meanwhile, his accumulated consciousness slowly starts to fade. He realizes that at this rate, his life will be over before the world is even destroyed. Faced with this, the young man decides he's not going to let things end like this. It turns out his Black Hood ability doesn't just steal curses, but it's also effective against other people's skills. Because it's extremely difficult, he never tried using it on Arthur, but now it's worth the risk. And with that, the young man activates his technique, and his target is Arthur, who's in the middle of regressing. Immediately after, a giant shadowy hand reaches out toward the hero, and our protagonist is surprised by what's happening. The dark ability was absorbing Arthur's skill. With that, the technique appears to be successfully transferred to Krosh's hand. The hero is shocked and asks if Krosh still hasn't given up. The young man then reveals that Arthur has already experienced countless destructions until now, and every single time he was left behind in a dying world simply for becoming useless, wondering how many times he's felt this same despair. But he warns that this time, it's Arthur's turn to be left behind, and the hero wonders if the young man has finally lost his mind. Our protagonist just gives a smile, and says that maybe Arthur is right. He reminds the hero that he was the one who said the world was destined for ruin. Realizing that Krosh was using his regression skill, Arthur is completely bewildered. The hero can't believe what's happening. The protagonist declares that he'll be the one to save the next world. After that, everything starts to brighten, and little by little, he begins to wake up, until suddenly his eyes open again. Apparently, the regression had worked. Even though he's small, he seems to have all his memories. Because of this, the boy looks around, trying to understand what happened, and apparently he knew that place very well, because that's the house where he lived when he was a little kid. A notification informs him that the regression is complete, and Krosh Walheim is now 13 years old. Right after, we get an explanation about world erosion, a phenomenon where the world is literally corroded by another dimension. Because of this, the environment transforms, and so-called erosion species invade the area. Among these creatures, there are some that look very much like human beings, and those are the most dangerous ones, as they usually lead other monsters in their attacks. These humanoid creatures are called world eroders. When one of these appears in a city, it's total chaos, and people run around desperately calling for the nightly order's help, and that's when those who fight against the world erosion step in. With their weapons and magic, they prepare for combat, and so, the battle against the eroders finally begins. These heroes are known as the Blue Sky Generation, and our protagonist remembers he was one of them. It turns out he only joined this generation because his body was able to seal curses. In the end, he was treated like a lightning rod for curses and betrayed by his companions, leading a truly miserable life. After this terrible memory, our protagonist wakes up startled in his bed. He then looks around and wonders where he is, but soon recognizes that it's his old room. Our protagonist is confused because a moment ago, he was in the dead of winter, and now it's so hot he's sweating. From there, he realizes he's in the Azure Pine Mansion, the place where he lived as a child. With that, he understands that his final gamble of using Black Hood on Arthur really worked, and he actually managed to steal the regression skill from the former hero. Our protagonist lets out a laugh, not believing what happened, but then he wonders how he was able to steal the technique. He knows that most people think Black Hood is a skill that can be used freely without restrictions, but the truth is it has a very distinct flaw. To steal a target with Black Hood, you need to unlock a lock that's generated the moment you activate it, and this lock is generated based on the value the owner places on their target. Even if it's just a rock picked up from the roadside, if the owner considers it precious, the difficulty of unlocking the lock increases absurdly. Therefore, things the opponent considers valuable, like their skills, are exponentially harder to steal. He concludes that the greater the value, the more conditions are needed, and the difficulty should have been much higher. At that moment, he thinks about Arthur and wonders what was going on with him back then, because he knows Black Hood was activated at that time, but he doesn't remember seeing any lock to unlock. The absence of a lock leads him to believe that Arthur actually wanted to get rid of the regression skill. He's shocked at the possibility that the great king of heroes wanted to throw away such a powerful ability. At that moment, our protagonist remembers that every now and then Arthur would show an expression of complete exhaustion and act as if he were just going through the motions. If he was repeating a world doomed to destruction over and over again, all alone, there's no way he could have kept his sanity. To Arthur, regression was no different from a curse. As such, he planned to pass his memories on to the three girls and try to regress with them this time, excluding our protagonist from the equation. The fact that he managed to steal the skill with Black Hood only confirms one thing. The Arthur he knew lost the regression ability and was left behind in that world on the verge of destruction, colliding with the meteor shower of the Blue Knight of Demise, which means he's gone. Our protagonist then says that he took the ability Arthur wanted to throw away so badly, and that he should be thanking him for it. He lets out a bitter laugh thinking about the situation, and remembers how he was always left out of the group, while they acted as if absorbing curses was something anyone could do, not caring one bit about a companion who was suffering right in front of them. Our protagonist remembers the despair and pain he felt back then. With a vengeful look, he says Arthur deserved it and calls him a piece of trash. Back in the present, in the hallway of the Azure Pine Mansion, he looks at himself in the mirror before leaving and notices how small he is. He looks to be about 10 years old, and despite being short, his body has decent muscle. This physique is the result of swinging a sword every day to try and survive in the Walheim family, the strongest martial house in the Starland Kingdom. From there, he deduces that if he's in the Azure Pine Mansion, it must be right after the trial ceremony he had at age 10. This Walheim family ceremony is an event to prove one's own strength and discover which god you'll contract with and what skill you'll receive. The more excellent the contractor, the higher the rank of the god they connect with, which is why the direct line of the Walheim family has always been valued. However, our protagonist was the sole exception, as he had no martial talent from birth, and thus no god chose him. Shortly after, he was expelled from the main house and sent to the Azure Pine Mansion, the place where all the family's failures are sent. And now, only he, the greatest failure of the Walheim family, knows how the world will end, an ending that not even the Blue Sky generation was able to prevent. Looking out the window, our protagonist wonders if he can stop the end of the world. He then has a vision of the destruction to come, but after a moment of weakness, he clenches his fist and tells himself not to complain. After all, it's not a matter of whether he can, but that he must stop the end of the world, since if the world is destroyed, he'll go down with it. With that in mind, he fills himself with determination, because there is no other option. At that moment, he thinks about the first step to prevent the destruction, but is interrupted by someone approaching. A butler appears calling him young master. Our protagonist recognizes him as Ariado and is surprised because at this point in the story, he was still alive. This was the only butler in the mansion and the only person who took care of our protagonist, even though he was a failure. However, our protagonist remembers that it was this very butler who gave him his brother's poison, and also recalls asking him when he planned to use it. This man was responsible for making him drink poison at 14 and taught him about the first betrayal of his life. We then see a brief glimpse of a girl fighting with all her might. She delivers a powerful blow to a giant monster in front of an audience. The crowd is shocked by the scene, and two men comment that the girl is only 15, yet the knights can't even get close to her. This girl is Charlotte Walheim, our protagonist's older half-sister, and she looks bored as her nickname, Sword Saint, shows she's no joke. Meanwhile, other nobles comment that she's a talent that appears only once every 1,000 years, which is why the head of the family has high expectations for her. Also sitting there is Barokin Walheim, Krosh's older half-brother, who hears the others say a new genius has been born, and the family no longer needs to worry about ruin. With a look of pure hatred, Barokin thinks he will annihilate that entire bloodline. He then begins to plot and realizes that Charlotte is too great a risk, and that her mother is also a problem to be dealt with. From there, he comes to the conclusion that his only remaining option is to focus on the useless failure of the family. We return to the flashback of his conversation with Ariado, where Barokin reveals with a malicious grin that he'll start his plan by getting rid of Krosh. He then tries to manipulate the butler, saying that his own path to success has been blocked because of our protagonist. So, Barokin offers a vial of poison and promises that if the butler gives just one drop to Krosh, his daughter's treatment and his financial problems will be solved. The butler is in a dilemma, as he raised the young master as if he were his own son, and wonders how he could do such a thing. Noticing the hesitation, Barokin calls him by name in a very serious tone, and backs him into a corner, asking if he intends to choose someone else's son over over his own daughter. With nowhere to run, the butler lowers his head in defeat and answers no. And so, the betrayal is sealed as the poison is placed in our protagonist's food. The scene returns to the past, and our protagonist's hand trembles. He then remembers finding Arioto on the floor with a knife plunged into himself. With his last bit of strength, the butler apologizes to young Master Crush for everything he did. At that moment, the young man breaks down in tears because, despite the betrayal, he considered the butler like a father. And just like that, Arioto's bloodied hand falls lifelessly to the floor. Our protagonist stays by the body, blaming himself for what happened. It turns out that in the original timeline, Arioto couldn't overcome the guilt and ended up eating the poisoned stew to depart from this world. Back in the new reality, the butler tries to feign ignorance, but our protagonist confronts him, saying he knows he was going to get rid of him because of his daughter. The man is speechless as the young man asks if he really thought his plan would stay a secret forever. Our protagonist then realizes that if he keeps pushing, he'll corner the butler again, so he decides to change tactics. He steps back and says that if he hadn't been a failure from the start, Arioto would never have received such an order. The butler is completely confused. He expected the young master to cry and get angry, not act with such calm maturity. With that, our protagonist turns to him with a new attitude, and instead of punishing him, he holds out his hand and invites him to follow, leaving the butler shocked at his master's change. Crush then gives a very strange order and tells Arioto to cut the wall, leaving the old man even more confused by the situation. Our protagonist then challenges the butler, saying that for someone from the ducal house of Walheim, it should be easy, and Arioto agrees that it is. Without wasting time, the butler gets into position, and an aura begins to emanate from him, and gripping the hilt of his sword tightly, he executes a precise cut on the wall. The cut is so clean that our protagonist is impressed and realizes a secret passage has been revealed. Arioto is shocked to find a secret passage there, but our protagonist just congratulates him on a job well done. The butler looks at his young master and thinks he seems like a completely different person than before. He even wonders if the boy stayed up all night lighting the place, as he gives off an atmosphere reminiscent of the family head. Approaching a door locked with chains and a padlock, our protagonist wonders what the heck happened there, but quickly pushes those thoughts away and tells himself not to dwell on old times. He recalls that after a fire, everything was reduced to ashes, but this time he managed to arrive before the tragedy occurred. The butler offers to cut the chains as well, but our protagonist stops him, saying they can't be cut. With a determined look, he declares that this time he'll test his own strength and activates his Black Hood ability. With the Black Hood ability, our protagonist easily breaks the padlock and chains holding the door, and the butler is astonished by the young master's strength. Arioto then asks if he made a contract with a god, and our protagonist says his skills haven't gotten rusty. He thinks to himself that at this point, he hadn't made any contract yet, but decides to trick the butler by saying he made a pact with an insignificant god, and that if he wants to, he can tell his father. The butler is shocked by the young master's audacity, because just the day before, he had a lost and lifeless look in his eyes. But overnight, he changed completely after supposedly making a contract with a god. Arioto then starts to believe that if it's the current young Master Crush, maybe he can achieve great things, even if he's not on his sister Charlotte's level. With a determined smile, the butler seems to have made a decision. He turns to our protagonist and calls him young master, and swears that at least until the boy finishes what he's trying to do, he won't tell anyone. Our protagonist understands that this is the downside of regression, because by taking different actions than in the past, a change is also occurring in Arioto. However, the butler who betrayed him in the previous life is still alive in his memories. Our protagonist then reflects that maybe Arthur let him steal the regression ability because of these discrepancies, and that if he cures the butler's daughter, he'll gain his loyalty. With that in mind, he decides to increase the number of pawns he can use, and tells Arioto to do as he pleases, while thinking he'll figure out what to do about his daughter's treatment later. The priority now is the secret library, and so he opens the door, and upon opening it, an intense glow shines from within, and he is surprised by what he sees inside. A powerful energy emanates from the place. The force is so great that he's left breathless. Even having been exposed to countless curses from the world erosion, he's never felt anything that gave him such chills, and he's sure his secret manual is in there. A fiery aura envelopes one of the shelves, and he realizes he's found what he was looking for. He spots some books with a sinister energy emanating from them. This is the secret library of the Azure Pine Pavilion, where the failed ancestors of the Walheim family recorded their techniques and memories. These were not divine skills, but products of human effort, and the place held the secret manuals to reach the greatest heights. In the beginning, it was a place anyone could visit, but it became a secret library because of one single person. That person is Valhis de Marisheim, a powerful ancestor with an intimidating appearance. He was known as the worst failure in the history of the Walheims, but after being consumed by the world erosion, he became the strongest person of all. With that in mind, our protagonist prepares to take the secret manual left by this ancestor, and as he takes the book, he gives a triumphant smile and says the manual is his now, and this ancestor's name was Damaris Walheim. He was both the greatest failure and the most powerful figure in his family's history. Back when he used his power, the world's greatest powerhouses challenged him to battle, but Damaris was not intimidated and unleashed his energy, and with his overwhelming power, he defeated all his opponents, and in the end, no one was able to stop him. The technique he used was called extreme blood poison. To be able to use this power, he absorbed the world erosion and possessed a secret madness technique to control this force. Since half of the book was burned before, our protagonist never understood why Damaris went mad, but now he wonders if it was because he couldn't control the rage of the erosion. He then recalls when he was hit by the world erosion curse and weakened it with Black Hood, neutralizing it with another curse. With this, he realizes that using the same principle, he can also control the rage of the extreme blood poison. Our protagonist understands that if he can steal a curse that controls rage, he can use it to neutralize the other, and thus, the two curses clash in a confrontation of opposing energies, creating a blast of light that represents the balance of forces. With this, our protagonist realizes he can become as strong as his ancestor Damaris. Full of confidence, he calls for Ariado, who promptly responds to his master. Our protagonist then gives his first order and tells the butler to ensure that from this day forward, no one else enters the Azure Pine Mansion. The butler understands perfectly and leaves to carry out his master's order without hesitation. As he walks away, Ariado reflects that since the young master overlooked his mistake, he must repay this debt, and so he decides he will refuse Barokin's proposal, because now his one and only true master is young Krosh. Elsewhere, Barokin explodes with rage upon hearing of the butler's refusal and questions him for doing this for a good for nothing. He looks at a news article about Charlotte and thinks that both the genius of the century and the failure deeply annoy him. Barokin laments that if that woman's dirty blood hadn't gotten in the way, he and his sister Lilish could have protected the direct bloodline. The girl beside him seems to share the same feeling of contempt, and this situation makes the young man grind his teeth in pure frustration. He then yells for someone, and a servant quickly appears to answer his call. Barokin then orders the servant to go to the Azure Pine Mansion and find out why the butler changed his mind. The servant informs him that they cannot enter the mansion, and Barokin is left dumbfounded. The young man explains that Ariado has blocked the entrance and warned that he won't let anyone in, not even the head of the family. Barokin is furious at the news and calls our protagonist an arrogant failure. Meanwhile, in the library, our protagonist meditates and concentrates his energy. He takes a deep breath, releasing a puff of purple aura, and with a clenched fist, he wonders if he has finally reached the entry level of an expert. There are several levels of aura, starting with aura user, which is the initial stage, and moving on to expert, master, and finally, emperor. The second stage is expert, which contains the largest amount of aura, and is the line that divides commoners from geniuses. Our protagonist reflects that although he has just reached the realm of commoners, his sister Charlotte, who is only 2 years older than him, is already almost an aura master. Even though she was an abnormal monster in the previous life, Charlotte was powerless against the destruction. She was defeated and left desolate amidst the chaos. Compared to her, he is still only at the entry level of an expert and wonders if he can really protect the world at this rate. He lowers his head, pensive about the difficult mission ahead, but he soon pulls himself together and with determination, says he'll only know if he tries. He then remembers that in his previous life, he couldn't even use aura because of a curse. But now the situation is different, and even if he can't compare to Charlotte, he can grow a lot with the secret manual left by a failure like him. With a determined smile, he thinks he can become much stronger, and for now, that's enough for his plans. At that moment, Ariado approaches the boy and congratulates him on reaching the expert level. Our protagonist just grabs the towel and says it's nothing to brag about. As he dries his sweat, he asks why the butler was waiting there. The old man bows and reveals that the young master's fiancée, Lady Bianca Hardenheart, has arrived at the Azure Pine Mansion. With this, our protagonist is surprised by the unexpected news. In his mind, the image of Bianca the White Demon appears, a figure who became a pawn of the world eroders and tried to annihilate everything, defeating one of the 10 most powerful beings in the heavens. However, he calms down, remembering that in the present, she is just the youngest daughter of the Hardenheart family. Looking at the little girl at the gate, he understands it's all just a political marriage. This way, the Walheim family gets rid of a failure, while the Hardenhearts, who rule the north, gain a connection to the strongest martial family in existence. Our protagonist realizes that they are both being conveniently used by their families. He actually needed to talk to Bianca anyway, and is surprised to see she came to him on her own. And so we are introduced to Bianca Hardenheart, the youngest daughter of the rulers of the north, whose mother was afflicted by the world erosion even before she was born. Due to the influence of the curse on her mother from the very moment of her birth, little Bianca was afflicted with a plague known as the snow dole. The curse was so severe it reached her soul, becoming impossible to break, and with her body contaminated, she couldn't form a contract with a god, being a cursed child born in exchange for her mother's life. The girl was treated with extreme coldness by her own family. Faced with the situation, our protagonist wonders if Bianca hated him. He just hopes this feeling won't interfere with his plan to steal her curse, as the snow doll curse is the key piece to controlling the rage of the extreme blood poison. Krosh then notices his appearance isn't very presentable, and Arioto immediately offers to fetch clean clothes, and our boy just thanks the butler with a slight smile. He then asks the old man to bring the visitor inside and have her wait. We then return to 5 months in the past, where Krosh angrily pushes Bianca, yelling at her to get out and accusing her of only wanting the power of the Walheim family. With a downcast look, the girl seems to absorb the boy's harsh words without saying a single word, and then he kicks the girl out of the room. The young girl then thinks that she isn't there of her own free will, and a flashback shows her father explaining that for the Hardenhart family to survive, they needed to ally with the Walheims, and with her beauty, it would be easy to win over their youngest son. He even puts his hand on her shoulder, and says that the fate of the entire Hardenhart house depends on her, and even without emotions, the girl thinks she knows right from wrong. Because of this, she reflects that if she weren't forced into a political marriage, she would never deal with a cynical, full-mouthed loser like Krosh. She then hesitates a bit, but decides that she is the one rejecting this engagement. Back in the present, our protagonist realizes he might have been too harsh in his past life. Already dressed, he tries to break the ice and complains that they served hot tea to someone with a sensitive tongue like hers, and that he'll have a little chat with the maids later. The girl, however, just stares at him in silence, showing no reaction. To try and liven things up, the boy suggests a walk in the garden since the weather is nice and there are flowers there that don't exist in the north. Immediately after, he calls for Arioto and asks him to bring macadamia nut cookies to the garden, and the butler promptly obeys. As they walk down the hall, our protagonist says her journey must have been long, and that since they're engaged, they'll have more chances to see each other in the future, and she just confirms. Krosh then says her tone sounds more like a superior officer than his fiancée. Bianca continues to stare at him in silence, seeming to process the situation. She thinks that something is definitely wrong, because the last time they saw each other, his gaze was sharp and piercing, but today he seems like a different person. Besides, she never told him she liked macadamia nut cookies. In the garden, the boy comments on how peaceful everything is, but the girl interrupts him and starts questioning him. With a serious expression, she asks if he is really Krosh. The two stare at each other in a moment of tension as doubt hangs in the air. Our protagonist feels a bit awkward with her direct question. He then asks if he seems that different from before, but accidentally releases his aura. The girl is terrified upon feeling that sinister energy and wonders what that bloodlust is. Scared, she bows and apologizes for speaking out of turn, while the boy panics internally because it wasn't his intention to scare her. He thinks that his memories of this period are hazy, so he doesn't remember well how he treated her. But one thing he remembers clearly, the only clear memory he has is the expression on her face, and that was the same expression she had on the day she met her end in front of the North Sea Pavilion in the past life. From there, he decides he needs a good excuse and says it's natural for her to feel this way since he recently formed a contract with a god. The girl seems to accept the explanation, thinking his personality changed because of the contract, and congratulates him on the achievement. Seizing the moment, he says he has a proposal for her, and the girl wonders what someone who made a contract with a god could want from her. The first thing that comes to her mind is the annulment of the engagement, and our protagonist is indignant, asking why on earth she would think such a thing. The boy then starts to belittle himself, saying he understands if she doesn't want to marry someone like him, and the girl just thinks there he goes with his self-deprecation again, wondering why a Walheim would have such low self-esteem. With a serious expression, the young woman interrupts the boy and affirms that she is his fiancée, and that this will not change in any way. Our protagonist is visibly touched by the declaration and wonders when was the last time he heard such sincere words. He then shakes his head to compose himself and says it's time to get straight to the point, revealing that with his newly awakened ability, he wants to take her snow doll curse. The girl is shocked by the proposal and can't believe he wants a curse that not even the most famous curse breakers could remove. She then asks if he plans to take the curse for himself, and Krosh confirms, offering any wish in return, including the annulment of the engagement, while the young woman reflects that having no emotions is an advantage because she knows that Krosh is treated as a failure, and because of that, there must be a chasm between him and the direct family line. Perhaps he is simply exhausted from everything to the point of wanting to erase his own emotions. The girl looks at the boy with a confused expression and wonders if this is what they call a mental illness. She then remembers what a mental type mage once told her. When a person reaches their mental breaking point, their mind becomes sick, and these people can end up taking their own lives or suddenly become gentle, as if they were a completely different person. The young woman then remembers that the mage warned her that these moments are dangerous and that these behaviors are signs of an imminent end, and that if someone close to her reached that point, she should stay by that person's side to help them. Back in the present, Bianca firmly holds Krosh's hand and says he doesn't need a curse to control his emotions, and that she is sure he can overcome this. Our protagonist is completely flushed by her attitude and tries to explain that she's getting it all wrong. The girl, however, ignores him and says she will visit him frequently and maybe even move nearby, leaving the boy even more lost, and then he questions if she didn't hate him. Bianca then squeezes his hand and states that even if she hated him, she couldn't abandon someone who is on the edge of the abyss, and our protagonist realizes she didn't deny the fact that she doesn't like him. He concludes that Bianca is the type who acts head on once she decides something, but that she is completely mistaken about his situation. Seeing that she won't hand over the curse willingly, our protagonist decides to try and steal it secretly with his ability. He then activates the lockboard technique, aiming directly at the young woman. The purple energy of the ability envelopes her hands, preparing to extract the curse. Suddenly, an unlock condition is generated, and the energy ricochets back to the boy, catching him by surprise. The first condition to break the lock is revealed. He needs to become friends with Bianca. The young master realizes this is going to be a problem since it's a double lock and concludes that because it's a birth curse, it has become part of her body. He finds the condition of becoming friends with the future white demon even more difficult than becoming her fiancé, as Bianca has no emotions and barely shows interest in anything. Our protagonist understands that if he lets her go back home, her transformation into the white demon will be accelerated, so he decides to keep her close and wait for a chance to break the lock, and thinks that if he can prevent her from becoming the white demon and get the curse, he solves two problems at once. For now, the best move is to listen to what Bianca has to say, so he says he's happy with the news and would love to see his fiancé more often. The girl, however, corrects him and says she will first consult her father before returning. As he watches her leave, he calculates that it will take at least a month for her to return, so he decides he will use this time to read as many secret manuals as he can in size, thinking things are getting quite hectic. The next day, at Cheongsong Hall, a man unloads some boxes from a carriage in front of the mansion. Our protagonist watches the activity, not quite understanding what is happening. Suddenly, a familiar voice greets him, calling his name. It was Bianca, who reveals she has decided to start living there at Cheongsong Hall from today on, and says she is looking forward to the time they will spend together. The boy is completely shocked by the news, and can't believe she's already moving in. From there, time passes, and the two begin living together. We then see Bianca sleeping peacefully in a deep slumber. Our protagonist wakes up and finds her sleeping beside him in bed again. As he yawns, he tries to wake her up and says people will get the wrong idea if they see her there. The girl then wakes up and, with the utmost naturalness, says good morning and asks what he's doing there, and the boy retorts that that's his question. Despite the comical situation, our protagonist continues his intense training, meditating and concentrating his energy to get stronger. Our protagonist then reflects that a few months have passed since he started living with Bianca. He remembers the day she arrived at the mansion and announced she would be living there. The boy is shocked by the news and can hardly believe it. He then questions her and she just confirms that her family gave permission immediately and without any issues. Our protagonist is worried about the fact that she is only 12 years old and living far from her family. He then thinks that maybe her lack of emotions makes her indifferent to this kind of feeling. In any case, he sees the situation as a good opportunity to become friends with her and break the lock. Time passes and the year is almost over, which reminds him that the opening of an important academy is near. The Laolin Academy was created by the four great kingdoms and the empire to train talents capable of fighting against the world erosion, and accepts students from 15 to 20 years old. In his previous life, this academy produced several members of the Blue Sky generation with super powerful abilities. The mere memory of those scoundrels fills him with great anger and frustration, but he composes himself and thinks that since he knows their weaknesses, he can easily steal their abilities, and that when he enrolls in the academy, he will take everything he can. He does the math and realizes he will turn 14 next year, giving him a whole year before enrolling, and that he needs to get at least a little stronger by then. However, during his training, he feels his talent is beginning to hit a limit. He then wonders if the beginner expert level is the most he can achieve with just the secret manuals. To overcome this barrier, the only option he has is to quickly steal the snow dole curse from Bianca and master the extreme blood poison. Our protagonist then goes to the living room and finds Bianca sitting, reading a book, and asks if she was waiting for him again. The girl confirms and says she can't leave him alone, and the boy thinks that since summer, she has been following him like a little chick. We even see a comical scene where he asks if she's gonna follow him to the bathroom, and she asks if she can't. The young master then wonders when she will finally see him as a friend. To try and speed things up, he suggests they go out to play, but is interrupted by Arioto calling him. The butler informs him that an invitation from the Star Sanctuary has arrived, and our protagonist is confused as he doesn't remember this. And so we discover that the Star Sanctuary is an annual party for minors in the Kingdom of Starin, where almost everyone attends to make friends and expand their network of contacts. With the explanation, he finally remembers the event and thanks the butler for the information. He reflects that before the regression, he was a recluse in the Azure Pine Mansion, and so his memories of this time are quite vague. With a determined look, he thinks that that guy will probably be there. Our protagonist then decides he will attend to keep his promise to Ariado and ensure he doesn't try anything against his own life again because of his daughter. He then informs the butler that he will go, and Bianca immediately joins him, saying she will go too. The butler just nods, and then the girl warns that the party attendees will probably criticize him. The boy agrees and warns the young woman that there's no telling what they'll say to her either, and suggests it might be better if she doesn't go. The girl, however, insists on going with him. With a sparkle in her eyes, she declares that protecting her partner is a fiancé's duty. Our protagonist is a bit flustered by the declaration and says he wasn't asking as a fiancé, but wanted to know her true feelings. The young woman becomes thoughtful, and the boy notices that same pitiful look from before. She then reflects that over the past few months, Krosh has been abnormally kind to her. The girl remembers how he always took care of her, asking what she wanted to eat, taking her to the library, and even covering her so she could sleep more. She feels a different kind of warmth, a kindness she never received even in her own home. His kindness was so great that she barely remembers her terrible first impression. Because of this, the young woman admits she no longer dislikes him and will go with him, and this time not as a fiancé, but of her own free will, which leaves our protagonist completely shocked. Speechless, he just stammers and agrees with her decision. The scene then changes to a carriage approaching a seaside castle, and someone asks if that is Garyu Hall. Inside the carriage, the boy wonders if they have money to burn since they rented the most famous tourist spot in the region. He then reflects that the reason nobles are respected is because they fight the world erosion in place of the commoners. But seeing those nobles who neglect their training and only lose themselves in parties, he wonders if this is really the future of Starin. He then thinks that he doubts there are many decent people at the Star Sanctuary, and so the two enter the hall and are announced as Lord Krosh Walheim and Lady Bianca Hardenheart. The guests immediately begin to whisper about the failure of the Walheim family and the wasted beauty of the daughter of the ruler of the north, commenting that they heard the two are engaged. Our protagonist ignores the malicious comments and just thinks about how boring it is to mingle with fake nobles. Suddenly, a young man comments that someone interesting has arrived. He is sitting on a sofa with two other people, and our protagonist realizes there are real nobles there too. The first of them is Barak Hogma, the tiger boy who would later join the Blue Sky generation. The second is the Elf Amelia, better known as Magby, and the last is Anix Glazer, the wooden bow, and the three would become the three heroes of Starin. The boy then reflects that the only reason those three are interested in him is probably because of his sister Charlotte, who in a past event defeated everyone who challenged her, and even complained that the Star Sanctuary should be called a dumpster. She found the event so boring that she decided never to return. Our protagonist remembers how she bragged about that day, and judging by the atmosphere in the hall, he deduces she must have already caused some trouble there. At that moment, Bianca pulls on his sleeve, getting his attention. The girl then asks him not to mind the voices around them, but the boy explains he was just thinking about Charlotte. He then reflects that Bianca was also being targeted by comments, but she still worries about him, and with a gentle gesture, he pats her head and tells her not to worry because he doesn't care. Our protagonist then looks around and wonders when he will arrive, and if he's not coming. At that moment, the guests fall silent, looking towards the entrance, and with a great fanfare, Lord Darling Danfilian is announced, and the protagonist thinks, "Speak of the devil," and he appears, and so we are introduced to the weirdo among weirdos, the Lord of the Alchemist's castle, Darling Danfilian. Our protagonist then remembers a time when he was completely covered in curses, and the young alchemist appeared. Shocked by his state, he then begins to analyze the curses with interest, and with an excited smile, he says he will use some techniques for the erosion curses and that he thinks he can heal him. The alchemist then grabs him and asks if he wants to be his guinea pig in exchange for a cure. Even without an answer, he insists and asks if the boy doesn't even have the energy to respond, and without further ado, he decides to start the treatment on his own. Our protagonist tries to stop him, but the alchemist seems to want to kiss him, and Krosh lets out a desperate scream, and then asks what the heck he is doing, and that was his first encounter with the man who would later be known as the greatest alchemy king in the world. Back in the present, the alchemist makes a grand entrance, while some girls praise his appearance, and others criticize him for arriving late on purpose just to get attention. Our protagonist just thinks that there was no way that show-off would miss a meeting with his peers. He then calls Bianca and takes her to the food table, asking her to wait there. The girl nods while eating some figs the boy got for her. With his fancy safe, he turns and walks towards the alchemist, who watches him with curiosity and wonders who that boy is. He feels he has seen the boy somewhere before and realizes it's Krosh Walliam, and thinks he looks a lot like Charlotte. The young alchemist then approaches our protagonist with sparkling eyes and asks if he is Charlotte's younger brother, and then asks if he has any business with him, and if maybe it's because of his incredible looks. Our protagonist then says he knows he has been investigating the world eroders, and provokes the alchemist by asking if that has piqued his interest. The alchemist laughs and calls him a provocative little brat. He then warns that since he has aroused his interest, he'd better be prepared and leaves the room, putting a "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door. Alone in the hall, he turns to the displayed weapons and asks how old Krosh is now. The alchemist picks up one of the displayed swords. Our protagonist replies that he is 13, and the young alchemist comments that he looks young, but his aura doesn't match his age. The boy then says that inside, he is an adult already graduated from the academy, and that he doesn't have much time, so he wants to get straight to the point. The alchemist smiles and tells him to say what he wants. Suddenly, the young alchemist throws a sword at him, and our protagonist catches it reflexively. With a surprised look, he barely has time to react, and the alchemist attacks him with a quick strike that the boy manages to block. Our protagonist questions him about the sudden attack. He then explains that he finally met Charlotte's brother and wanted to see his skills first. Krosh thinks he's a pain in the neck, but the alchemist reminds him that he wanted to say something, and as they trade blows, our protagonist tries to start the conversation, and he starts fighting seriously, and the alchemist is shocked by his skill, wondering if he wasn't a talentless failure. Our protagonist replies that it may not seem like it, but he trains every day, and thinks he is in a complicated situation using a secret technique against a scholar, so he decides to try to destabilize him. He then mentions the alchemist's research on curse neutralization and says he wouldn't mind helping him, leaving Danfilian completely shocked. The alchemist underestimates him, asking what he knows about alchemy to want to cooperate with him. Taking advantage of the distraction, our protagonist advances with a quick movement, and manages to corner him with the sword at his neck. He then talks about the research to neutralize the curses of the world eroders with other curses, and mentions that to become a first-class alchemist, he needs to prove this research. The young alchemist sheathes his sword and seems interested in the proposal. With a confident smile, our protagonist offers his help in the research. Using his ability that steals curses, the alchemist is completely shocked upon feeling his aura, and wonders how a skill, less failure, can have so much power. He then realizes that if Krosh's words are true, this is the perfect chance to simultaneously prove supply and demand and curse neutralization, and with a greedy smile, he asks what he should do in return. He even suggests becoming his boyfriend, but our protagonist tells him to shut up and explains that he will acquire several curses in the future, and wants him to make a medicine that weakens them. The boy then reflects that just stealing abilities is not enough, since not even the Blue Sky generation with their extraordinary abilities could prevent the world's destruction. Because of this, a failure like him has no choice but to use all possible means, whether it's medicine or anything else, to get stronger. The alchemist is surprised because he heard his motivation had been crushed by being constantly compared to Charlotte, but it seems that's not the case. He then thinks that one is an overwhelming genius and the other a twisted eccentric. With a flushed face, he gets excited at the idea of what an interesting pair of siblings. The young alchemist then asks to ask a question, and our protagonist just agrees. He then asks if the boy is going to the newly created Yahello Academy. With a confident smile and a ball of dark energy in his hand, our protagonist replies that it's obvious. The alchemist is excited by the answer and thinks the academy is full of skills for him to steal. He then accepts the deal and says he will make the medicine and anything else he needs because he loves anything related to curses, and the spot next to him is always vacant. Our protagonist has one more request for him. He then asks if the alchemist knows about the discoloration disease, and Danfilian confirms that it's the incurable disease where the skin turns blackish, blue, and eventually leads to one's demise. Our protagonist then asks him to create a cure for this disease, which leaves the alchemist completely confused. He questions if the boy doesn't know the meaning of the word incurable, and says that even for him, that's impossible, but our protagonist thinks that he himself was the one who completed it in the future. Krosh then lets out a sigh, and then clenches his fist, and with total confidence he says the alchemist can do it. The young alchemist accepts the challenge because because hearing that stirs his pride. The two then seal the deal with a fist bump. Our protagonist asks him to get in touch at the Azure Pine Mansion when the medicine is ready, and the alchemist agrees to deliver it personally. But before leaving, the boy has one more question. He then asks if the alchemist likes his sister, and he replies with a passionate, "I love Charlotte." The boy questions him about the offer to be his boyfriend, and the young alchemist replies that he is still a child and wouldn't understand. He then gets closer and reveals that he also likes men. Our protagonist is completely shocked by the revelation. The boy then yells, "I don't," and runs off while the alchemist calls him his future lover. Far away, he thinks that now he remembers the alchemist was that kind of person. He then returns to the main hall and observes the guests. With a somber look, he seems to be looking for someone. Suddenly, he sees Bianca being held by the wrist by another guest. The girl seems uncomfortable with the situation and calls out our protagonist's name. Her eyes fill with a strange energy. With a quick and furious movement, our protagonist lands a kick to the face of the man holding her. The man flies away from the impact of the kick as the guests watch in shock. Lying on the ground, he complains of the pain, and our protagonist accuses him of trying to take his fiancée by force. With a furious look, the boy questions him about his intentions. He repeats the question with more intensity, making it clear he will not tolerate it. The man is terrified by the boy's reaction and tries to defend himself. Our protagonist accuses him of trying to touch a 12-year-old girl and calls him trash, asking if he has some kind of weird fetish. The man panics and reveals he was just following Princess Claudia's orders. Our protagonist is surprised to hear the name Claudia Sterin. The man confirms that the second princess sent him to bring Lady Bianca to her, and that since the young woman resisted, he tried to take her by force because it was a royal order. Our protagonist then looks at Bianca, who seems frightened by the situation. He knows she is the youngest daughter of the rulers of the north, but because of the curse, she is despised by the nobility, and that's why he finds it strange that the princess, who usually only amuses herself with her loyal servants, specifically summoned Bianca. Our protagonist feels that something is wrong with that story. He then observes the princess from a distance and realizes something doesn't add up. He realizes there is another connection there, and with a malicious smile he identifies the real mastermind, Kiyumi Anix, the same guy who was persistently pursuing his sister. Our protagonist remembers that after getting beaten by Charlotte at the Star Sanctuary, Anix hated her but couldn't help admiring her. Since he can't defeat Charlotte, he targeted her younger brother, which the boy considers a very sloppy plan. With a sigh of disdain, he seems to have figured it all out, but he wonders if this means Anix can drag Bianca into his plans, and approaches the fallen man with a threatening aura. He then informs him that he will go there, but instead of the second princess, he will see Anix, which leaves the man confused. Our protagonist provokes him, saying he serves the princess but doesn't even know whose orders he's following and that his intuition is terrible. He then holds out his hand to Bianca and invites her to go with him, leaving the fallen man behind. The two then walk together down the hall. Our protagonist then asks why she refused to go with the man. He already knew who the mastermind was because of his memories before the regression, but he wonders why Bianca, who is only 12 years old, didn't obey the princess's order. The girl replies that it was because he told her to wait. Our protagonist is surprised and touched by her answer. With a slight smile, he praises her for a job well done and pats her head as they walk. Upon reaching a closed door, Barak Hagma, the tiger boy, greets them. He seems happy to see him, and our protagonist informs him that he came to see Anix. The tiger boy confirms that Anix said to let him in if he showed up. Our protagonist then reflects on Barak Hagma, a skilled dual-wielding swordsman with an unpredictable personality, whom he prefers not to get involved with. But he realizes that Anix's instructions saved him from having to deal with the tiger boy and points to the door. Barak, however, stops him and says he was also curious about him and that they should settle it right there. But our protagonist reminds him that combat is forbidden at the Star Sanctuary. The tiger boy argues that if he fought Charlotte, then he can fight him too, and provokes him by saying he seems weaker than his sister. Our protagonist then remembers hearing that Barak did better against Charlotte than Anix, lasting longer in the fight. Even among experts, Barak's skill level is slightly higher, and he has an unpredictable combat sense. He then prepares for combat as he realizes he will have to deal with Barak before meeting Anix. Our protagonist would rather avoid fighting him but realizes his eyes won't let him escape easily. He then clenches his fist and accepts the challenge. With a quick movement, he dodges a strike from the tiger boy and counterattacks with a powerful kick. He stumps hard on the ground to gain momentum and delivers a devastating punch to the opponent. His eyes glow with intense energy, and he uses the instantaneous strike technique. The tiger boy is thrown to the ground with the force of the impact. Our protagonist stands victorious after the strike. Lying on the ground, Barak complains that he's not holding back. Our protagonist replies that he was the one who challenged him to the fight. The tiger boy gets up excitedly and asks to continue, but first, he wants to get his weapon. Our protagonist questions if he can really continue. With a challenging smile and blood dripping from his nose, Barak seems ready for the next round. The tiger boy is completely confused, not understanding what just happened. Our protagonist just watches him from above as Barak remains on the ground, completely defeated. Bianca then approaches and asks what the heck he did, and the boy replies that he used one of the Walheim family's secret arts. This technique is known as instantaneous strike, an ancient art created by the family's renegades that unleashes maximum destructive power at the shortest possible distance. We discover that this was the only technique recovered from Omatsu Hall, which was completely burned down, and thanks to it, Crush managed to survive countless life or death situations. Therefore, he reveals that he used his strongest secret art and that because of it, Barak shouldn't be able to get up anytime soon. Contrary to expectations, the tiger boy cracks a smile and calls him Lord Crush, while our protagonist just tells them to get inside. As they open the door, they come face to face with Anix Glazer, who was waiting for them with a very smug look. The boy then calls for Barak while our protagonist and Bianca stare at him without saying a word. With a smirk, Enix says he is surprised he managed to defeat his colleague. Our protagonist just replies, asking if that wasn't why he left the tiger boy waiting at the door. He then points to Anix and reveals that he knew he was using the second princess to lure him, and that's why he came to meet him personally. Anix is intrigued and asks how he figured all that out, as he seems very different from the rumors he heard, and wonders if the gossip was wrong. Our protagonist confirms that the rumor about him being a failure is true, but warns that if Anix loses to him today, the story will be different. With a confident smile, he adds that the rumors will change a bit because he's going to steal all of his abilities. Our protagonist confirms that the rumor about being a failure is true, but if Anix loses to him today, the content of that rumor will change a bit. Anix just remains silent with a confident smile on his face, seeming to analyze the situation. With a serious look, our protagonist prepares to face Anix Glazer. From there, he remembers that the two were together from the academy to the Blue Sky generation, and that Anix was an old friend. Because of the time they spent together, he knew him very well and knew their friendship was based solely on his usefulness, and that usefulness was for the worst possible reason, as he remembers being thrown off a cliff towards a monster. At that time, he was terrified upon realizing that all his companions had been defeated. Desperate, he clings to the edge of the cliff and asks Anix for help. The boy, however, hesitates, thinking that if it was discovered the trap was his fault, he would lose his place in the Blue Sky generation. Because of this, he comes to the conclusion that if he is the only one to survive, no one will know anything, leaving our protagonist in shock. Anix then reveals his true motives and says that there is already a big internal power struggle and that Crush would surely be expelled because of that incident. With a cold and calculating smile, he seems to have made his final decision. Thus, he decides he will put all the blame on our protagonist because since he was already hated by everyone, the incident would be easily covered up. With a sick smile, he thanks Crush for being his friend until the end. Our protagonist recalls the fury and betrayal of that moment, questioning the meaning of the word friend. He then yells at Anix not to be ridiculous because he never considered him a real friend and accuses him of only staying close because of Charlotte, which left him in a daze all day since she was getting married. With a dark look, Anix reveals that is exactly why he hates him. The boy continues, saying that Crush has no ability whatsoever, but his intuition is good, and he always tries to find flaws in everything. From there, he declares that if Charlotte is really getting married, their relationship ends right there. Faced with the situation, he turns with a cynical smile and wonders if it wasn't for the best. He even adds that Charlotte wouldn't want a funeral and a wedding at the same time, and our protagonist calls him a scumbag. With that, our protagonist's strength begins to wane, and his hands slip from the edge of the cliff. As he falls, he wonders if this is the end of everything, but suddenly, Arthur appears and saves him, asking if he's okay, and that was the moment the two became teammates. Back in reality, our protagonist reflects that that was the beginning of a new misfortune. Meanwhile, Anix remembers being expelled from the Blue Sky generation because of Arthur's testimony, and that he was furious he tried to marry the princess but wonders how he is now. With a smug smile, he comments that both Crush's way of speaking in his face look a lot like Charlotte's, and our protagonist realizes that Anix hasn't changed at all. Crush then stands in front of Bianca and tells Anix not to say his sister's name so casually, and then questions if he really thinks they look alike. Immediately after, with a purple aura emanating from his body, our protagonist charges towards Anix, ready for combat. Our protagonist confirms that he is exactly like his sister, and that he has a personality that accepts any fight that comes his way. Anix just watches him with a confident smile, unshaken by the imminent attack. With a powerful kick, our protagonist tries to hit the opponent, but Anix summons a wooden root to defend against the blow. Without losing balance, the boy uses the root root itself as support, and from there he propels himself into the air, preparing for a new aerial attack, and delivers a powerful punch that hits Anic square in the face. Our protagonist doesn't stop there and takes advantage of the opening to land a kick to the opponent's side. However, he is surprised and ends up being thrown back by the impact. It turns out that the wooden tentacles grabbed him and threw him forcefully towards the ground. Even so, the boy manages to land safely, preparing for the next move. With an irritated look, our protagonist thinks that in the end, Anic is a very annoying opponent. Anic then asks if that's all he's got and suggests he use a weapon while activating his family's secret technique called Mokutentaziki. This is a special secret technique that strengthens and freely manipulates plants with aura and can also complement the technique's limit by multiplying plants with a recovery ability. Our protagonist then bends down and picks up a piece of wood from the ground while wondering if Anic really told him to use a weapon. With a challenging smile, he gets up and warns that in that case, he will fight with his opponent's own wood. Anic gives a mocking laugh and asks if he really thinks so. He then sends a bunch of wooden roots towards our protagonist and challenges him to block the attack with that branch. However, the boy moves with impressive agility, dodging all the attacks with ease. Faced with the situation, Anic is completely shocked, not believing he managed to dodge. He thinks that if it were a genius like Charlotte, it would be one thing, but for a failure like Krosh, he wonders if the boy has awakened the mind's eye. With a confident smile, our protagonist says that for Anic, he is like a natural enemy. He continues to provoke and reveals that he has seen his abilities so many times before the regression that he got sick of it. The boy then throws it in his face and asks if he's thinking about Charlotte again, which makes Anic completely furious. Losing his patience, he says that if he keeps listening to Krosh quietly, a powerful green aura begins to emanate from his body as he prepares a massive attack. Our protagonist senses the danger and jumps back, moving away from the rocks forming around him. Anic then warns Krosh to be careful, what he says, and summons the fifth form of his technique, the Celestial Wood Giant. With a malevolent smile, he tells the boy to be more careful next time, preparing to deliver the final blow. Suddenly, a girl appears at the door, screaming desperately. She yells for Anic not to do it because if the attack hits Krosh directly, he won't survive. The Celestial Wood Giant then prepares a devastating punch towards our protagonist while the girl warns that this will have an irreversible consequence. However, our protagonist remains with his eyes closed, completely calm, and some leaves fall around him. In that instant, he remembers one of the books from the secret library of Amatsuken, the thinnest of all the secret arts manuals. It turns out that the master of that manual was an ancestor who swung his sword until he was 80, a person with no talent whatsoever who just repeated common movements. The book, written in his final years, recorded only sword swings, but the secret art required a state of union between the object and the self that could not be achieved with little training. However, since he was put in similar situations many times because of the curse, he was able to understand that ancestor's secret art. With that in mind, the boy declares that the sword becomes him and he becomes the sword, and the branch in his hands glows with an intense blue aura. With a single strike, he releases a powerful blast of energy that cuts the giant's fist in half. The attack is so strong that the wood giant is completely destroyed, and the boy reflects that it's a very simple truth, and all that's left are the creature's remains. Faced with the scene, the girl is completely shocked by what she just witnessed, and even Bianca seems surprised by her fiancé's power. Anic's jaw dropped, unable to believe what his eyes are seeing. Amidst the dust, our protagonist calls out to him in a very serious voice. With a serious look, our protagonist warns him never to be arrogant again and asks again if he understood. Completely defeated, Anic falls to his knees on the ground, with nothing left to do. After the attack, the wood giant crumbles into several pieces, and our protagonist is completely exhausted. Krosh can barely stand, and even his voice won't come out right. At that moment, Bianca approaches to help him. The girl then holds him and says she will help him, and soon after, darling Danfilian also appears, running towards them. Our protagonist lets out a groan of pain because Bianca is squeezing him too tightly. The young alchemist warns that she'll finish the boy off like that, and asks to leave it to him, and our protagonist agrees in his thoughts, so darling Danfilian picks him up easily and carries him on his shoulders. Back in the main hall, the other guests start gossiping, unable to believe that the failure defeated Anic. The young alchemist realizes that the rumors are already spreading rapidly through the hall. He then wonders if the boy is bold or just doesn't think things through, but concludes that either way, when he wakes up, he will be famous. Besides, he seems a bit worried about something else. Anic's expression earlier bothers him, and he has a feeling the boy will try something after this. Faced with the situation, he warns our protagonist that he can't depart from this world until he helps him with his research. A week passes since the party at the sanctuary, and our protagonist is already back to his intense training. Amidst the debris, he finally feels free from the damage caused by his last strike. He reflects that if he had used the technique continuously to corner Anic until the the end, he would have been in an even worse state and remembers passing out in the carriage all the way back. Because of this, he regrets that if he hadn't lost consciousness then, he could have at least done the prep work to steal the ability. With a determined look, he thinks that he had considered two ways to steal the ability. The first was the standard method of unlocking Black Hood, and the other was a way to guide the opponent to devalue their own ability. He intended to use the second option on Anix because the characteristic of this method is that it becomes easier to execute if you can overwhelmingly defeat the opponent. Since the wood giant was defeated by his single strike, the doubt Anix felt should spread like ripples in water. By suffering a defeat to a failure he looked down on, the boy would begin to doubt the value of his own technique. Thus, even if it takes some time, he is sure that Anix's recovery ability will eventually be his. Because of this, for the remaining year until the academy, he would like to spend every day training to surpass the geniuses, but something interrupts him. It turns out Arioto appears at the door, calling for young Master Krosh. The butler then informs him that Master Barokin has arrived at the Azure Pine Mansion, and our protagonist thinks that his brother is also at his limit since he refused his messages twice. Lying on the sofa, the boy says he can't postpone it any longer and tells the butler to let him in, and the old man agrees. While waiting, Bianca approaches and offers him a glass of water, and our protagonist thanks her awkwardly. The girl then asks what happened and says he smells like sweat, leaving the boy a bit embarrassed. He then wonders if it's because waste is expelled when using aura and covers his nose, thinking his sense of smell might have gone numb from the stench of erosion. Bianca asks if he will wash up before meeting Master Barokin, and our protagonist says no because he will probably be moving again anyway. Faced with the answer, the girl asks him to please not come near her. Our protagonist is surprised by her attitude and asks if she is giving orders to her fiancé. He then thinks that Bianca has grown up and gotten sassier. Immediately after, the girl runs off, and our protagonist chases her, asking if she thinks she can escape him. The boy thinks that Bianca is like a little sister to him, and that's why he just wants to tease her, but he reflects that the people he knew before his regression would probably look at his current self with cold eyes. He then has a vision of Arthur calling his name with a disapproving look. The hero's voice in his head asks if he has already grown soft with peace and if he thinks he can stop the world's destruction by acting that way. As the former hero's blonde hair flutters, our protagonist thinks of the name Arthur. He doesn't want to admit it, but except for that final moment, Arthur was a hero who was always at the forefront without letting his guard down. Back in the present, Barokin's voice interrupts him, asking where Arthur is and what he is doing now while playing with his fiancée. With a look of pure contempt, this is Barokin Walheim, the third son of the Walheim family. Our protagonist replies that a break is sometimes necessary, leaving his brother completely shocked. Barokin remembers that the boy used to be afraid to even make eye contact and questions why he is looking directly at him, then asks if the rumor that he defeated Anix is true. Our protagonist then questions him about his sudden visit since he should be busy, but Barokin just replies asking if he is really busy. From there, the boy mentions the Rehern Academy and how it decides acceptance by examination regardless of social status. With a smile on his face, our protagonist says that in that case, his brother should also prepare. The boy is completely shocked and wonders if the good for nothing is provoking him. He then reflects that even the strongest empire in the world fears the Walheims and that his family is in a different dimension, with him being a direct descendant. With a sneer, he tells Krosh not to get arrogant just because he defeated Anix and calls the idea of studying a joke. Our protagonist agrees, saying that from a common person's point of view, it's inevitable to worry about getting into the academy. With this attitude, the older brother gets even more irritated. He then changes the subject and reveals that the real reason for his visit is to relay an order. Barokin informs him that they will go to Mount Gerlach to stop the world erosion that occurred there, and our protagonist is shocked because family missions are only mandatory from the age of 15. With a malicious smile, the older brother tells him not to worry because he will be his guardian and provokes him by asking if the guy who defeated Anix would be afraid of something of this level. Our protagonist realizes right away that his brother is trying to test his ability and keep him in check, but he still accepts the mission and tells them to go. He thinks that in any case, he is more used to world erosion than a peaceful life and that even if it's a trap, he has a plan to escape. As he prepares to leave, Bianca asks where he is going, and our protagonist warns that he will be out for a while because of the erosion and tells her not to follow him. With a confused expression and a slight smile, the girl just questions his order. Barokin is irritated by the interference, and our protagonist retorts that sending a 13-year-old to stop a word erosion is absurd. Thus, the boy stands in front of Bianca and calls her his fiancée, asking if a generous brother would take a 12-year-old girl's words seriously. His defiant look makes it clear that he will not back down. Because of this, the older brother grinds his teeth in pure rage at the good for nothing's audacity. He then just scoffs and turns his back, leaving the place without another word. Immediately after, the boy pats Bianca's head and congratulates congratulates her on a job well done, but the girl replies that she didn't do anything. He continues with a playful tone and says that if she is not aware, it's okay. The young woman then places her hand on his head and asks him to please not pass out again. With a smile, he agrees and says goodbye, leaving for the mission while Bianca watches him. We then get a brief explanation about world erosion, a phenomenon where reality is invaded and worn away by a foreign dimension. In some cases, corrupted life forms like giant insects emerge at the site, while in others, the terrain itself undergoes mutations, transforming into something completely different. If the erosion progresses enough, the area can completely transform into a separate dimension, and a group of knights comments that a swamp has appeared on Mount Garrelak. One of them says he heard the erosion was classified as 3-star and asks if the purification unit has already moved, and the other replies that they will start as soon as the Lord is defeated. With this, they conclude that a squad of mid-level expert knights should be able to handle it without major problems. The knights continue, saying that Barokin may seem rude, but he is already at the advanced expert level, so defeating the Lord of the Eroded Land should not be difficult. Already at the site, Barokin calls for our protagonist, who responds promptly. The boy then reveals that he brought him there so he could gain first-hand experience. With an innocent smile, our protagonist agrees and calls him brother, but thinks to himself, who does he think he is to talk about experience? He then reflects that he followed his brother despite his attempts to pressure him for a single reason, and that reason is to test a provisional method to suppress the rage of the extreme blood poison. As they advance, the knights begin to face the monsters, and with a precise strike, one of the insects is cut in half. One of them complains that the monsters just keep coming, and another asks to look to the side. Our protagonist then gives instructions to the knights and warns them about a headless creature that still has teeth, saying that if it bites them, its body will expand, and tells them to reinforce their entire body with aura, and the knights obey promptly. One of the knights approaches the boy and calls him Lord Krosh, asking if he has dealt with world erosion before. Our protagonist just replies that he is only 13 and that it would be strange if he had already faced something like this. Faced with the answer, Barokin laughs and wonders why that useless brat is acting so confident when they've barely entered the eroded zone. He then remembers when he first stepped into an erosion zone at 15 and his pride was completely shattered. The boy wonders how the good for nothing has the audacity to lecture the knights and thinks that it doesn't even compare to his experience. With a look of superiority, our protagonist turns to the knights and tells them not to compare him to his brother. With our protagonist's declaration, Barokin becomes completely furious, grinding his teeth. He then grips the hilt of his sword tightly and begins to question hypothetically, if Krosh grows up like Charlotte and surpasses him, would the failure of the Walheim family end up being him, and the mere idea terrifies him. Suddenly, our protagonist calls him brother, pulling him out of his thoughts. He then informs him that they are almost at the Lord's location, and the ground begins to be covered by a red substance. The older brother comments that he is lucky because the situation seems easier than when he faced one, and that the Lord seems to be the only corrupted entity around. However, our protagonist warns him that this means they need to be even more cautious, because a 3-star Lord capable of sustaining the corruption alone is extremely dangerous, and the other knights are terrified by the idea. Barokin yells at them not to be intimidated and not to let a child's words shake them. He adds that it's just a 3-star monster and tells them to finish it quickly so they can go home, and the knights obey promptly. Our protagonist thinks they will be fine without him, and that he will focus on his own task. Suddenly, his eyes widen with a sudden realization. He can see the presence of the world erosion and thinks that, since he mastered the extreme blood poison, his perception has become much sharper than before the regression. With that in mind, he scoops up some of the red substance from the ground and ingests it. Suddenly, his eyes turn completely red, and he seems to feel intense pain. He then begins to cough up a large amount of that substance, worrying the others. One of the knights asks if he is injured, but our protagonist lies, saying he just tripped, while Barokin offers to carry him, but the boy refuses, saying he is fine. As he wipes the corner of his mouth, he thinks that coughing up that substance is exactly why he mastered the extreme blood poison. According to the secret manuscript, first, he needs to merge his aura with the erosion energy. Then, he must observe the flow of this aura, which circulates endlessly, like a vast, roaring river until the erosion energy is absorbed and the aura is gradually swallowed by this massive flow, forming a new hue that cannot be overwritten. With his eyes now completely red, he seems to have reached a new level of power. He then stumbles a bit to the side, still getting used to the new sensation, and wonders if this is what's left after a fit of rage, because no sane mind could withstand such devastation. Faced with the situation, he decides that maybe it's time to use that forbidden technique. We then discover that after the Damaris Valheim Seashow Hall was sealed and believed to be lost to history, one of his ancestors who had lost his sight found the hidden archive. However, his blindness prevented him from deciphering the grimoires, leaving him no choice but to close the secret library again. So that no one like him would appear again, he chose to leave a single grimoire behind behind inside the hidden archive. And this grimoire was called Extreme Blood Poison. With this, a powerful blue aura begins to emanate from our protagonist's body. This energy then expands rapidly throughout the area. We discover that this is an extrasensory perception based on aura, a technique that detects all sensations with just its energy, which is basically a sixth sense. He explains that at the moment, he can only extend the range to his fingertips, but even so, it is enough to perfectly understand what is around him. With a victorious smile, our protagonist realizes that the place where he is no longer completely consumed by erosion. The boy concludes that the density of the erosion has weakened and that he managed to overcome it using his sixth sense. Even with the victory, he still wipes some blood from his mouth, showing that the effort was not small. He knows that this is just a temporary measure because absorbing the erosion energy always runs the risk of triggering a fit of rage. Because of this, he understands that he will still need Bianca's Snow Dole curse for more stable control. Even so, our protagonist clenches his fist, satisfied, because the fact is that he managed to suppress the rage. He realizes that with this, he has taken another step forward in his journey, and from afar, Broken seems shocked by what is happening. Suddenly, the boy looks to the side as if he feels something strange and can't believe what he is seeing. He comes face to face with a bizarre creature with a rocky body and an arm that seems to have a human face at the tip. The face at the tip of the monster's arm seems to be sleeping peacefully, but in a flash, the creature awakens and its eyes glow with a threatening red light. Several bizarre bodies merge into one, revealing the creature's full form. One of the knights screams in terror that is the Lord of the Erosion as the monster reveals its body covered in skulls. Immediately after, the creature lets out a deafening roar. The roar leaves Barokin completely terrified. Our protagonist also can't hide his shock at the monster's appearance. Before them stands the thousand-faced demon, a 4-star creature, and Barokin yells for all units to prepare for combat. The knights draw their swords, and Barokin also prepares for battle as his sword begins to glow with a blue aura. The blue energy intensifies on his weapon's blade, and in an instant the blue energy turns into burning flames. With this, he activates his special ability called Ignis, and his body is completely engulfed in fire. One of the knights comments that Lord Barokin's Ignis is dazzling and that its destructive power is insane, burning everything it touches. Our protagonist observes the scene and remembers the name of that ability. He recalls that it was the same technique that burned his arm in the past, while Barokin yelled, asking if he understood the difference in strength between them. Observing his brother now, our protagonist thinks of his name and remembers that before the regression, his brother was completely unbalanced. Our protagonist then wonders how his brother is now. With a malicious smile, our protagonist hopes he hasn't changed at all. Suddenly, one of the knights is hit by the curse, and his face begins to be erased while another screams in pain. One of the knights screams desperately that it is a curse that erases faces. He continues, saying that even the senior knights are struggling against the monster's 8 arms, and that rookies like them have no way to avoid the curse. Faced with despair, the knight thinks that the only thing they can do is flee. However, Barokin takes the lead in the battle and yells for everyone to advance. With his flaming sword, he leaps towards the monster and delivers a powerful fire strike. The creature feels the impact of the attack and lets out a cry of pain as it is hit squarely. The flames spread across the monster's body, which begins to crumble into pieces. He then turns to his men and yells at them not to give up, because he will create an opening. With the demonstration of power, the other knights are completely impressed and motivated. They comment that it's as expected of Lord Barokin and follow him into battle without hesitation. As he leads the attack, he looks to the side and wonders if Krosh is watching his performance. But he can't find him anywhere and, with a tone of contempt, wonders if the good, for nothing has already departed from this world. One of the knights then notices that the boy is not looking at him but directly at the thousand-faced demon. Barokin then turns his attention back to the battle and notices that the monster is crying tears of blood. The skulls on the creature's body also begin to shed the same dark liquid. Faced with the bizarre scene, the boy thinks that this is bad, and that things are getting dangerous very quickly. The monster then launches a series of black tentacles towards the knights. Barokin is shocked by the overwhelming pressure emanating from the creature. He then realizes he needs to finish off the thousand-faced demon right now before more anomalies occur. With that in mind, he yells for all knights to focus their attacks on the monster. He then delivers a powerful fire strike, but to his surprise, the attack has no effect, and he wonders why even attacks with aura are not working. Without time to think, he prepares for a new attack, and yells at his men not to lose courage, because they are knights of Walim. However, all the knights are paralyzed, not moving, and Barokin wonders what the heck is going on. He then wonders if it's a curse from the thousand-faced demon, as he didn't even touch the creature. He then realizes that the previous anomaly was actually a trap. With this, he finally understands that he has been deceived all along, and the thousand-faced demon stares at him with a threatening look. Suddenly, the scene changes, appears, and a heavy rain begins to fall amidst thunder and lightning. Amidst the storm, our protagonist recalls a scene from the past where he was completely desperate. Lying on the ground, he thought he was going to depart from this world, and that at this rate, he would surely be caught by the monster. The creature approached with its sharp claws ready for the attack. The boy wondered why this was happening to him. He couldn't believe he was going to depart from this world like that. In his mind, a female voice calls him an idiot and asks if this is how the strongest of Walheim will end. The voice continues, saying that his younger sister surpassed him, and after bluffing, he lost the entire knightly order and tried to save himself only by fleeing. The voice then calls him a pathetic failure who deserves to depart from this world as the monster prepares for the final attack. The creature then delivers a powerful blow, and the boy lets out a scream of panic as he tries to protect himself. However, he is hit squarely by the devastating attack. However, at the last second, our protagonist appears and saves him, carrying his brother on his back amidst the storm. Lying on the ground, Barokin finally regains consciousness, and with blurred vision, he tries to understand who saved him. Before him, Krosh appears with a smile, happy that his brother has woken up, and the older one is confused, asking what the good, for nothing is doing there. Our protagonist explains that he survived and was watching the fight from a distance the whole time. He continues, saying he saw when Barokin was swallowed by the swamp, and that's why he pulled him out and fled, while his older brother just replies that he is fine now and can walk on his own. Krosh then questions him, asking how he intends to walk with a body that can't even use its aura. With a provocative smile, he approaches and asks if his brother is sure he doesn't need his help. Faced with the provocation, Barokin grinds his teeth, completely humiliated by the situation. He then pushes our protagonist's hand away and yells that he doesn't need help from an idiot like him. Immediately after, however, the boy is terrified as he realizes the danger they are in. Desperate, he asks if the thousand-faced demon is still around and how far they are from the battlefield, but our protagonist replies that he has no idea. Krosh then explains that since they have walked a lot and still haven't managed to get out of the place, it probably means the world erosion has sealed itself. Barokin is completely horrified as he understands they can't get out unless they defeat the creature. He then curses the situation in pure frustration, and our protagonist calls him brother, trying to calm him down. The boy then reveals that there is actually a finishing secret art that Charlotte taught him. He explains that the reason he was able to fight Anix at the Star Sanctuary was because of this same technique, and his brother is shocked to hear that Charlotte has a secret art. We then get a glimpse of the past and wonder if Barokin harbors special feelings for the siblings who are children of the same mother as Charlotte. Back in the present, the older brother questions if with this technique they will really be able to defeat the thousand-faced demon, and our protagonist confirms that they will. The boy then explains that instead of dodging and eventually departing from this world inside the erosion, it's worth at least trying to fight. With this, he holds out his hand to help his brother up and says he understands if he doesn't trust him. Our protagonist then plays his trump card and asks if his brother at least trusts his sister's strength, which leaves Barokin completely speechless. He then leans on his sword to get up and agrees, because after all, Charlotte is a genius. The boy, however, warns that if the plan fails, they will both be done for, and a dark aura begins to emanate from them. With a confident smile, our protagonist assures that the plan will not fail. Suddenly, a noise echoes through the forest, indicating that something is approaching. The two brothers hide behind some bushes, and our protagonist warns that the thousand-faced demon is approaching. He then asks if his brother's Ignis is ready, and Barokin confirms with a flame in his hand. With everything prepared, our protagonist says they should start the operation. He then takes a step forward, preparing to initiate the attack. With this, our protagonist prepares for battle, and his body is completely enveloped in a blue aura. He then closes his eyes and concentrates completely on the technique. Faced with the scene, Barokin is completely shocked by what he is seeing, and wonders how the good, for nothing can have such incredible focus as the blue aura envelopes our protagonist's sword. His eyes glow with the energy emanating from the boy, and he thinks he has never seen such a pure aura in his entire life. The older brother remembers when Krosh asked to combine Ignis with Charlotte's secret technique, and admits he was skeptical, but now he wonders how his brother managed to master an aura he himself never achieved. Suddenly, our protagonist calls him, pulling him out of his thoughts. The boy then asks Barokin to give him Ignis, and even though hesitant, the older brother agrees and summons a flame in his hand. Then, the flames transfer to our protagonist's sword, and with overwhelming power, the boy prepares for the attack. His older brother just watches the scene, unable to say a single word. Our protagonist then asks if something is wrong, and reveals that it seems there will be time to execute the plan, and that's why Barokin doesn't need to buy time for him, which leaves his brother completely stunned. He then realizes that that the flames on Krosh's sword burn much more intensely than his own, and concludes that with that power our protagonist's sword will surely be able to defeat the thousand-faced demon. Barokin remembers how he lost his men in the blink of an eye, and that the only thing he could do was flee to save his own skin. He then thinks that if Krosh manages to defeat the thousand-faced demon, he will come out as the real failure of the story. With this doubt in his mind, he wonders if he is really weaker than the good, for nothing as our protagonist delivers a devastating blow to the creature. With a single attack, the flaming sword cuts the monster in half. The older brother is completely shocked by the scene, unable to believe what just happened. A massive fire explosion engulfs the entire place, destroying everything around. Immediately after, the storm and erosion disappear, giving way to a calm and sunny landscape. Suddenly, a voice calls for his brother. Our protagonist then appears with his hair still in flames and announces that it's all over. The older boy gives a forced smile and comments that it was too easy. With a bitter laugh, he grips the hilt of his sword. With a look of pure hatred, he yells for the good, for nothing to depart from this world. Without a second thought, he attacks our protagonist from behind, but the boy manages to turn in time and block the blow. Our protagonist is completely confused by the situation. Barokin then wonders why he can't use Ignis, and our protagonist thanks him as a purple aura emanates from his sword. With a sinister smile, our protagonist thanks his brother for being exactly the same as before. Immediately after, a window appears, showing the conditions to unlock Barokin's lock. The first condition was to voluntarily entrust a part of Ignis to the target. The second was to recognize that the target used Ignis better than him, and the last was the total collapse of his pride. With this, our protagonist punches his brother in the stomach and reveals that the moment he used that attack, Ignis became his. As the remains of the thousand-faced demon still burn, a scream of pain echoes through the place. Barokin is on the ground, completely defeated, while Krosh just stares at him, calling his name. Holding what seems to be the monster's core, our protagonist says that at first, he really hoped to get along with his brother and the others. We then get a glimpse of the past, where a young Krosh looks sad on the ground. At that time, young Barokin just told him to stop messing around, and with this, our protagonist reveals that his wish never came true. Back in the present, the boy presses the sword against his brother and says that all of this is because of his hostility. He admits that he still had a small hope that this time Barokin would recognize him as a brother, but fortunately, that option never existed for him. As the older brother is in pain, our protagonist just asks if it hurts. He then remembers when Barokin burned his arm and his face and says that he writhed in pain the same way. With a kick, our protagonist sends his brother flying, and so, the boy just watches his brother's fallen body without showing any emotion. Our protagonist lets out a bitter laugh at the situation. He then looks at the sky and ironically comments that the weather is nice. Meanwhile, at the Walheim main estate, the news that the Knightly Order was annihilated spreads like wildfire. Someone explains that the erosion was upgraded to 5-star and that it was a level that required elite experts to handle. Amidst the funeral, guests comment that if it weren't for Barokin's sacrifice, Krosh surely would not have survived unscathed. Faced with the situation, Barokin's personal butler explodes with rage and wonders how the failure was the only one who survived. The head butler of the Walheim house, however, tells him to watch his words and reminds him that this is the brother Lord Barokin protected with his own life. He adds not to let Barokin's honorable departure be in vain as our protagonist walks away from the place in silence. Far away, he thinks that since everyone believed his testimony, he probably doesn't need to worry about it anymore. The boy then reflects that thanks to his brother, he achieved substantial results in that expedition. Now he can use the extreme blood poison, and has also confirmed that he can control the rage the technique causes with his sixth sense. And through Ignis, he also managed to unlock the black flame. He explains that Ignis is an ability capable of igniting anything, and that by applying it to the world erosion, he never expected it to be so effective, and so the black flame surpassed his expectations as a powerful trump card. With that in mind, the only problem left to be solved at the main house is the investigation of the abnormal phenomenon that occurred at the erosion site. Someone knocks on the door, and our protagonist says to enter while thinking that at this point, they probably haven't identified the cause of the problem yet. We then discover that it was actually the world Eridor, and that its main body is sunk in an eternal dream, unable to see reality except through the eyes of its lackeys, the undead. Faced with the situation, he thinks that if they have already started their activities, it means he might encounter the undead's lackeys sooner than he thought. But suddenly a woman greets him and calls him Lord Krosh. We discover that this is Saphira, a fourth-class investigator from the World Erosion Investigation Team, and she says she was waiting for him. In that instant, our protagonist notices a black star mark on her neck. He is completely shocked to see the black star and wonders how he could have found one of them so soon. Our protagonist then lets out a half-hearted laugh, and the investigator is confused. Without wasting time, he calls her an undead and says he wants to make a deal with her. With a confident smile, our protagonist points at her and reveals that he will erase her immortality. With a sinister smile, she questions if he is by any chance a regressor. Her true form is revealed, and she says she was looking for something else, but never expected to capture such unexpected prey. We then discover that this is the undead Crimson Garden of August. Our protagonist then remembers that before the regression, he tried to steal the undead's immortality following Arthur's orders but ended up failing. At that time, they discovered that with this, the undead would be at its limit, just regenerating its physical body, leaving it unable to control its lackeys. The investigator then reflects that the only reason the undead kept so many subordinates was simply because its main body was immobilized by a curse, and so she feels sorry for him. The other girl, however, questions what part of that is lamentable and asks if she has forgotten how much they suffered because he raised the level of the erosion zone. The girl then tells her to stop acting like a saint, and the other tries to apologize, saying that's not what she meant. In any case, Arthur says the problem with the undead has already been solved and tells them to stop the senseless fighting. The undead, however, laments the situation. He then turns to our protagonist and says it's a shame he failed to steal his immortality, and the boy laughs in agreement. The undead adds that even if the boy were reborn, it would be impossible to succeed. It turns out the reason for this is that the condition to unlock the lock was to be stronger than the undead itself, a practically impossible task. Back in reality, our protagonist questions what exactly made her think he is a regressor. The investigator then explains that the moment a mere child proposed such an audacious deal, she knew it would be impossible unless he was one. With this, she accuses him of being just a regressor caught in the jeers of time, and that's why he can't defeat an existence that transcends time itself, telling him to stop lying. Our protagonist, however, states that it is not a lie as a purple aura hand with a mouth forms in front of him. Immediately after, he launches his ability towards the investigator. The woman is shocked to realize that the technique can steal even immortality and recognizes the ability as Black Hood. Faced with the situation, the investigator clenches her fist, seeming to make a decision. We then discover that she continued to raise the level of the world erosion just to find someone capable of ending her life. With a look of admiration, she realizes that the one who can steal the curse of immortality has finally appeared, and so she asks what the terms of the deal are. Our protagonist then reveals his plan and says she needs to cooperate with him so he can become stronger, as his ability won't activate unless he is more powerful than her. With a smile, the woman understands that he is asking to become her disciple and thinks she was prepared to sell her soul to get rid of immortality. With her eyes glowing red, she agrees to the deal. The woman then unleashes her true form and declares that she, the Crimson Garden of August, will turn him into the strongest man in the world. Our protagonist is impressed by her power and thinks he is being overwhelmed just by the aura, and that this isn't even her main body. He then reflects that with her cooperation, he will surely become even stronger. With a clenched fist, he thinks that even if he has to borrow the power of an Eridor, he will stop the world erosion. We then discover that a skill is a unique technique that only one person in the world can possess, and that following this providence, the regression skill returned to the Arthur of this timeline, making it impossible for Krosh to regress again on his own. This means that if the world is destroyed in this timeline, his existence will disappear along with it, and so he tells the investigator that he is counting on her from now on and calls her Crim. She is a bit confused by the name and corrects him, saying her name is Krosh. With an irritated look, she then holds his face and yells at him to call her master. He then walks away and says he can finally go home. The investigator then questions if this isn't his home, and he replies that he hasn't lived there for years. Our protagonist then reveals that it's been so long he doesn't even remember his parents' faces, and at that moment, a hooded woman appears and informs him that her lady is summoning him. The boy is surprised by the news and wonders if his mother finally became interested in him after hearing the rumors that he changed, since she never appeared at the Azure Pine Mansion. The woman then confirms and reveals that the master of the house has returned from the Forbidden Region and wishes to meet him, which leaves our protagonist completely shocked at the idea of meeting his father. He then reflects that his father is an existence that has reached the realm of a demigod, and that maybe he sensed something about him through the stars. The woman then informs him that because of this, he must reside in the main house, and that this is the message lady area entrusted to her. Our protagonist, however, thinks he can't waste time idly at the main house because he has Bianca waiting for him and a mountain of things to do, and with that, he realizes the instruction to spend the night there was not an order from his father. Faced with the situation, he announces that he is leaving and will only return when his father summons him for real, leaving the investigator and the hooded woman shocked. He then adds with a provocative smile that his father can come and meet him personally, and with that, he and the investigator depart in a carriage. The scene then changes changes and shows a city with a large castle in the center, followed by a forest landscape. Already in the carriage, our protagonist stretches and says he is finally free and that he doesn't plan on returning to the main house anytime soon. Suddenly, the investigator in demon form starts banging on the window and calls him a rude disciple, telling him to open the door. Our protagonist is startled by the scene and questions her about her flashy color. She then tells him not to worry because she can change color at will and immediately transforms into a black crow, asking how she looks. Our protagonist replies that she is black like her wicked heart, and the investigator calls him an idiot. He then questions her about her main body, and she replies that he asks even though he knows her body can't move and calls him a disagreeable regressor. Our protagonist thinks that although Arthur is the true regressor, he is just an imperfect regressor who borrowed his ability, but there is no need to explain this to Krim. The carriage then finally arrives at its destination. Upon getting off, our protagonist warns that there is a white-haired girl in the Azure Pine mansion and asks her to be gentle with the young woman. The investigator is confused by the term and wonders who this girl is. Before them, Bianca appears in a chick costume and welcomes Krosh. Our protagonist then turns to Krim and asks if she saw that. At that moment, Arioto comes running and calls for young Master Krosh, who asks if something happened while he was away. The butler then informs him that a letter from Lord Darling has arrived, and the boy sighs as he takes it. In the letter, the alchemist announces that the medicine for the discoloration disease is ready, and that since he was thinking of Krosh, he prepared it in a flash and will bring it soon. And our protagonist thinks that they say the world is full of eccentrics, but this is too much. He then turns to the butler and warns that if a person named Darling Danfilian appears, he should be treated with the utmost hospitality, because he will surely become a benefactor to him, and the old man agrees. Suddenly, the butler remembers something and says that Lady Bianca has been worried about him the whole time. Arioto confirms and reveals that upon hearing the report that the young master had been caught in the erosion, she tried to travel to the main house to find him. Our protagonist is touched by her concern. Our protagonist thinks that he hasn't checked Bianca's lock recently, and because of her concern, he decides to take a look. The first condition to unlock the lock was to become friends with Bianca, and to his surprise, the unlock was successfully completed. The boy is completely stunned as Bianca's first lock was finally unlocked. The girl, however, doesn't understand anything and asks if there is something on her face. He then stammers that there isn't and says he just wanted to introduce a new companion. The young woman then picks up the crow, and our protagonist reveals that its name is Crime. The girl hugs it tightly and comments that it is soft like cream, and with this, our protagonist realizes that Bianca likes animals. He then changes the subject and wonders one thing, and that thing is how he will unlock the second lock, whose condition is to become the most important person to Bianca. He then reflects that an important person usually refers to parents, children, friends, or lovers, and since the two are engaged, he concludes that the last option is the most likely. Meanwhile, Bianca tries to catch the crow again, which seems quite scared by the situation. The girl, however, seems very determined to catch it. Our protagonist then thinks that becoming the lover of Bianca, who has no emotions, was certainly not a condition before the regression, and that he, an adult inside, now has to court a 12-year-old girl. The investigator then comments that it seems the white-haired girl liked her because she refused to let her go for a long time, and our protagonist agrees that she must have really caught her attention. As night falls, Krim calls for Krosh, who asks what's up. The investigator then reveals that she wishes to confirm his strength and tells them to go to the training ground, leaving our protagonist completely terrified. Already at the site, the boy is wiped out on the ground and Krim comments on how disappointing he is. She then questions if that is really the limit of a regressor's talent, and our protagonist replies that he already said he is just a failure. The investigator then says that he may have gotten this far using secret arts and the experience of his regression, but in 5 years a true genius will leave all that hard work in the dust. However, she reveals that this only applies when talking about raw talent, and that before her, talent means nothing. She explains that this is where his ability lies, and that if he has no talent, he simply needs to steal it from everyone else. With this, she declares that she will drag him up because he was destined to rot at the bottom of the well for all eternity, and that he will conquer everything that is far above the clouds. And finally, she tells him to steal even her immortality. Our protagonist clenches his fist, determined by the proposal, and says he doesn't even need to be told. Several days later, someone appears running and shouting happily. It turns out that Darling Danfilian has arrived, and he asks if he made Krosh wait long, but our protagonist questions since when he became his dear. The boy then asks about the item he requested. With a triumphant smile, the alchemist reveals a vial and announces that it is complete. He then brags, asking if he isn't a genius, and our protagonist agrees, saying he has always been a genius. The young alchemist lets out a satisfied laugh at the compliment, and then hugs Crush tightly, who tells him to stop. Darling Danfilian then reveals that he has something to tell him, and says he heard that Anix has changed. He explains that even after he stopped training after losing to Charlotte, the rumor is that he resumed his training after the incident at the Star Sanctuary. Our protagonist is a bit embarrassed by the news and wonders if even a traitor like him was influenced by his attitude. The investigator then comments that she assumed the kingdom of Sterin was insignificant except for the Walheums, but that this situation is perfect and that his body is fragile, and she intended to strengthen it with spirit elixirs anyway. With a malicious smile, she then suggests that he ask that man born under the Star of Alchemy to create some spirit elixirs for him. We then discover that spirit elixirs are a special medicine that enhances physical capabilities and aura when consumed, and that they are extremely expensive, and their secret manufacturing arts are usually inherited through noble families. Because of this, they are goods reserved for the privileged, and our protagonist thinks that they were items completely out of his reach. But the investigator reveals that she knows the mixing formula, and that he just needs to transmit it to the alchemist. Our protagonist then calls Darling Danfilian and says he has one more request for him, but the alchemist complains that he just sent him home. Without beating around the bush, the boy asks him to make a spirit elixir, and the young alchemist is surprised, asking if hearing about Anix motivated him, and questions him about the material costs since the Walheims certainly wouldn't fund him. Our protagonist tells him not to worry because he will find a way, and thinks he can make it work if he takes advantage of the knowledge from before the regression. The investigator then tells him to repeat exactly what she says, and he begins to list the ingredients of the spirit elixir. The alchemist is silent, processing the information. Soon after, he is completely shocked by the formula, and begins to write everything down in his notebook, wondering how to combine the ingredients. He is amazed by the information and asks where Krosh got it, and Krim replies that it is a mixing formula transmitted by the Walheim family. Darling Danfilian then says he would certainly like to try, but the problem is getting the ingredients. He explains that not even he can get his hands on the white snow solar fungus or the golden dragon herb, and that the fungus grows in Hardenheart, but the mountains are treacherous and erosion has advanced there, making it almost impossible to obtain. Our protagonist then says he will try to ask his fiancée since her family's home is in Hardenheart. With that resolved, the alchemist says that only the golden dragon herb remains, a phantom herb said to grow only near the nests of golden dragons deep in the Empire, and that they could buy it from a black market dealer, but they would be in trouble if the Empire found out. The investigator then suggests that he participate in the juvenile martial arts tournament held in the Elgrin Empire for fighters aged 15 or less, and that he just needs to get first place since the reward is the golden dragon herb. Our protagonist, however, says that if there are no other options, they have no choice but to look for a black market dealer, but Darling Danfilian reveals that for a boy like him, he will teach another way. Our protagonist rubs his face and reminds the alchemist that he is a Walheim, and explains that the Empire probably has political reasons against the Academy, and so if he participated in a tournament like that, things would get very complicated. With a convinced smile, the young alchemist says that of course, a genius like him has a plan for that, and then he offers a pink vial and tells the boy to drink some. The boy is completely confused by the situation and asks what the heck that is, questioning if the potion will make him invisible or something. Immediately after, our protagonist lets out a scream of agonizing pain. Suddenly, the boy's body changes completely, and he transforms into a girl, and with a satisfied smile, the alchemist explains that anyone can enter the tournament, and that it's okay as long as his true identity is not exposed. Thus, he says that Krosh just needs to become a girl and enter the tournament, and then hugs him tightly while our protagonist screams desperately for him to stop and change him back. The investigator, however, just observes the scene with a look of pure judgment. Faced with the situation, the boy becomes completely enraged, and with his eyes glowing red, he unleashes a dark aura and asks if the alchemist is mocking him. With this, the young alchemist is completely terrified and, stammering, apologizes desperately,